Hi class, welcome to lesson number 30. We're continuing our macroeconomic introduction here. So we're trying to get into the basics right now, and hopefully we'll get into the specifics pretty quickly. But first, and most importantly, let me finish the homework from last time. The question was, what are the four components of aggregate spending, or GDP? They're the same thing. And the answer is as follows. First one is consumption, second is investment, third is government spending, and fourth is net exports. So GDP, or aggregate spending, is equivalent to C plus I plus G plus X minus M. Consumption, investment, government spending, net exports. Okay? This should be like in your mind. If I wake you up in sleep, you should probably know that equation. So really important. Please make sure that you pay notice and pay attention to that particular equation. All right, so that being said, we've covered the homework topic. I want to start off with a new material onto my right. And this basically says what is a business cycle, right? How does business cycle work? In economics, we've seen a consistent trend, and we've tried to label different parts of the business cycle with different names, right? For instance, if you see the business cycle, right, is going down, and one of the biggest mistakes I made here is that I did not label my axes. So here is time on the y-axis, so you guys know. So we're going this way, okay? And this is actually our GDP, real GDP, okay? Real GDP. So if my real GDP is declining, you see this part of it, okay, it's called as a contraction, okay? Now, if my real GDP is going down for more than two consecutive quarters, it's what we titled the word, and we probably know this pretty well, unfortunately, right now. It's called a recession. Okay, so a recession is if your real GDP has been falling consistently for two consecutive quarters. That being said, if you look at this business cycle here, it's expanding, all right? It's going up, so that's called expansion, pretty straightforward. The top of a business cycle is called as a peak, okay? The bottom is a trough, right? Peak, trough. Okay, and the falling of the business cycle, or the going down, right, is a contraction. I've talked about that before. If the contraction stays for a longer period of time, and it's pretty clear, it's not even a recession, but it's a lot more than that, it's called as a depression. Okay, that's something that we don't want. We definitely don't want that. All right, so that being said, let's we've talked about the four different things in part of the business cycle. I want to now get into a word that we talked about a little bit before, a price index, but it's going to be adding a third word called consumer. So let's talk about a CPI, or a consumer price index. All right, a consumer price index basically is trying to see what the average price level of items are. Okay, what the average price level of items are. And I talked a little bit about this in the last class, so we can go about it in detail. All right, so let's define this CPI. Okay, let's define the CPI. CPI, known as consumer price index. And what does it say? It basically measures the average price level of items that consumers actually can buy. Average price level of goods, that consumers buy. Okay, so how do we measure that mathematically? All right, we need two particular things for calculating a CPI. One, we need the base year. We talked about that before. Okay, a base year serves as a reference for us for understanding how we're calculating our figures and our prices. Okay, so that we're accounting for inflation. The second part is the market basket of goods. What is a market basket of goods? The market basket of goods basically is a collection, market basket of goods, okay, and it has about 400 goods, okay? And this basket, this market basket of goods holds, and not all, okay, but holds most of the goods that consumers buy, okay? So these two combined, we use those to understand what's the average price level of goods that consumers are buying at. And CPI establishes this mathematical result. All right. So let me write it down again. I know we've talked about this formula before, but why not go over it one more time? So let's figure out the equation for the price index, okay? Price index is written as follows. You've got price index is equivalent, okay? And let's talk about the current year, okay? Is 2010. All right, let's set that as the base year, or not the base year, excuse me, the current year. So how much you've spent in the current year, okay? Current year, okay? Over how much you've spent in the base year, okay? Spending in the current year over spending in the base year times 100, okay, will give us the price index, okay? So let's define another term we've been using a lot. Let's define inflation. What is inflation? I know we've used this term before, but let's technically define inflation. Inflation is defined as the annual rate, okay, the annual rate that the CPI is changing from one year to the other. So the percent change in CPI, okay, percent change in CPI from one year to the next, from one year to the next, okay, to the next is inflation, okay? Obviously these words have been shortened a lot, but you get the point. Inflation is the percent change in the CPI from one year to the other. That's how we measure inflation. Okay, so we're done with that. Let's talk about a small equation, but still pretty important, called the nominal interest rate. Okay, might show up on a test, so just in case, we'll cover it. Nominal interest rate. Nominal interest rate has two parts. It's equivalent to the real interest rate. The real interest rate plus, you guys probably already know this, expected inflation. Okay? So when I go to the bank, okay, when I go to the bank and I take out a loan, all right, they're going to account for the real interest rate, but also they're going to say from one year to the other, okay, how does the prices change? And depending on that, they calculate an expected inflation, and then these two combined give me the interest rate that I'm going to be paying for that loan. Okay? So nominal interest rate consists of real interest rate and your expected inflation. All right? Another thing that we try to get out of the way. Now, that being said, there's also unexpected inflation. All right? And what is unexpected inflation? Unexpected inflation is just any price level change that has either been not calculated for, or it basically is unpredictable, okay? So it's increased by a much larger amount or decreased by a much larger amount than what people have predicted, okay? So that is unexpected inflation, and it's probably very important for you guys to understand that. So we've covered the nominal interest rate, we've covered inflation, consumer price index, expected inflation. Unexpected inflation is basically opposite of expected inflation. We're not predicting it, so it might happen, like if it's in a recession, right, and we don't expect that inflation, we need to account for that unexpected inflation. Anyways, we've covered a couple different terms here, and that being said, we're going to go into the repercussions of a recession, namely unemployment. Okay, a nasty topic, but important in understanding in economics. Okay, so unemployment. Let's talk about unemployment. Unemployment is defined and calculated in many interesting ways. Many of you will know and should note that unemployment actually in many economies is understated, which means that the unemployment might actually be worse than what it actually is. Kind of sad. But I'll tell you exactly why unemployment is understated. All right, first let's define a couple things for unemployment. First is the labor force. All right, so what does a labor force consist of? Labor force consists of the sum of all individuals who are 16 and above, actually, who are 16 and above. I'll put it in parentheses. 16 and above. Okay? So anyone below 16 is not counted into the labor force. Understand that. Who are either currently employed or unemployed. Okay? Who are pretty straightforward. Who are employed and unemployed. All right, so what's the problem, you say? Well, think about it. How do we define unemployed? Okay, unemployed is actually a very interesting way to define it, but it's people who are actively looking for work. Okay, they're people who are actively looking for work. So what happens to the people who quit looking for a job? So say, we're in a tough economy, right? We've been trying to actively look for work and we can't find a job. Unfortunately, you come under a segment of the population known as discouraged workers. Okay, if you're a discouraged worker, right, you're actually not counted as the unemployed person. So this is why unemployment is actually understated. So if you are in a position where you've kind of quit looking for a job, well, you fall under the unemployment. Employed is anyone who's 16 and above, okay, but is making at least an hour of pay. So he's getting paid an hour per week. So, it could be part-time, it could be full-time. Point is, if you're working even an hour a week, you come under as employed, okay? So understand that when we calculate unemployment rates, okay, there's a lot of statistics that go behind it. You can't just blindly take that number, okay? So imagine there's a huge chunk of people who are not looking, who are not actively looking for jobs under the government, what government defines it as unemployed people, right? And that's why your unemployment rate is actually understated. So unemployment can actually be worse, much worse than what you actually predict in a recession. Kind of sad, okay? So how do we calculate unemployment rate, okay? And how do we get to this number? Well, first is we talked about your labor force known as LF, okay? Labor force adds up your employed and unemployed, right? Pretty simple and straightforward, right? So what about, that's your labor force. What about unemployment rate? How do we get your unemployment rate? Unemployment rate, known as UR, okay, let me erase that, make it a little clearer for you guys, okay? Unemployment rate, UR, takes the number of unemployed people and divides it by the labor force, okay? Pretty straightforward. People that are unemployed divided by the total people that are in the labor force, and you get the unemployment rate, okay? But we talked about the fact that these discouraged workers are not in the unemployed or the labor force that matter, and so they're not accounted for, okay? So LF is equal to employed plus unemployed. Discouraged workers are not in it. Unemployment rate is the people are unemployed over the total labor force, right? That's your equation. I guarantee this probably would show up on the test, so make sure you understand this pretty simple but straightforward formulas, okay? Next topic we're going to cover, okay, again, not such a great topic, but we have to do this because it is important in economics, and it is the types of unemployment, okay? And there are actually 3 types of unemployment, believe it or not. And did you know that a full, healthy economy actually always has people that are unemployed, okay? So we never actually have a 0% unemployment rate, okay? That is impossible. And I'll tell you a little bit why that's impossible, okay? So let's go over the 3 types of unemployment, All right. First is we start off with unemployment called frictional unemployment. Frictional unemployment. Okay. What is frictional unemployment? Well, there's a segment of the population, okay, in the labor force. Okay, this is in the labor force that is in transition. Okay, they're in transition, or they've come new to the economy. Okay, so take a college grad. Okay, he's just come in and he's looking for a job. Okay, he comes under the frictional unemployment. Take a person who is been either fired out of a job or has quit his job, wants a better one. Okay, he or she comes under the frictional unemployed. Okay, and frictional unemployment actually is not that bad because it's for people who are actively looking for a job. They're in transition. Okay, sooner or later they're going to get the job. Okay, so they're actually not a big chunk of the unemployed. Okay, but frictional unemployment always exists. Okay, this always exists. All right, so remember, frictional unemployment always exists. Secondly is seasonal unemployment. Seasonal unemployment. Okay, what is seasonal unemployment? Seasonal unemployment is pretty straightforward, right? Say it's Christmas. Okay, you see a lot of in the malls. We have families and kids who take pictures with Santa Clauses, right? And all these workers. I mean, Santa does exist. I don't want to break anyone's idea of Santa, but okay, these people actually work and they wear costumes, right? Sorry, if you believe in Santa, but these people, once it turns January or February, right, obviously they can't work in that job anymore, all right? So depending on the season, jobs actually change. Take farmers, for example, right? When it's time to harvest the crop, right, you have a whole bunch of jobs that show up. So seasonal unemployment works in a way that it's typically based on the time period which you're working at. Teenagers have jobs during the summer because that's when they're free, okay? So seasonal unemployment obviously is pretty straightforward. Depends on the season, okay? So let's look at actually there are 4 types of unemployment, excuse me. Let's look at the third one, which is called structural unemployment. Structural. And structural is actually the nastiest kind of unemployment, all right? Because structural unemployment is caused by a fundamental change in the system, okay? Where the job skills are not required. I'll give you an example, okay? Say that there's this person who all of his life has been making clothes by himself, all right? And he's been working for this company and he's making clothes with his hands, all right? All of a sudden, a machine rolls through and it does exactly what he does, faster, better, and in a much cheaper way. Unfortunately, what happened is that the economy and a fundamental shift in the economy has caused this machine to be manufactured, right? And that job skill set is no longer required. So that person comes under the structural unemployment rate. Now, the way we can battle structural unemployment is that governments have training programs. They train people so they can create a whole new set of skills, right? So maybe they can teach them technology, maybe they can teach them how to work those machines, right? Or we have universities, okay? Governments fund universities, right? In California, we have our UCs. Basically, these are meant to train students so that they have like a skill set that's actually required by society at that point in time, all right? So that's the idea behind structural unemployment. Lastly is cyclical unemployment, cyclical. And what is cyclical unemployment? Cyclical unemployment is basically pretty simple. It's when an economy is doing well, right, we hire more people. Economy is doing bad, we fire more people, right? The business cycle obviously creates and eliminates jobs. And cyclical unemployment talks about this particular thing. It is really important to understand that structural unemployment might be forever, okay? But cyclical unemployment actually can change dramatically based on the time period, all right? So if in a recession we have cyclical unemployment, but let's say we're in a boom, all right, this might not be there. So structural, okay, and frictional are always consistent in an economy, okay? So because of this frictional and structural unemployment, we always have unemployment even in a healthy economy, all right? So what does that mean, okay? So we now know that it's impossible to have 0% unemployment rate. Okay, 0% unemployment rate is not possible. So we define the full employment. Okay, full. Let me take another marker so it'll be a little better. Okay, full employment. Okay, full employment rate, okay, is actually the situation of full employment is defined as, actually, excuse me, when we have full employment, the rate of unemployment is defined as the natural rate of unemployment. So basically when we have full employment, right, economy is in full employment, things are great, things are doing well, we have a natural rate of unemployment because it's impossible to have 0% unemployment rate. All right, so what is this number? Well, people don't know. Some people say 4%, up to 6%. Just depends which economist you talk to. Times have been really good. We've had 4%, so people think it's 4%. Could be as much as 6%. That is something that you'd have to go into in further detail with your professor or your teacher. But understand that at full employment situation in our economy, we operate at a thing called natural rate of unemployment. Rate of unemployment can never be 0. All right, so as long as you understand that, it'd be very beneficial for your learning in economics, in macroeconomics, that is. All right, so that being said, since we've covered the types of unemployment, I want to go over some basic equations known in economics as the consumption and savings schedules, okay? So what does that mean? Before I start jumping into all of that, let me define this wonderful thing called disposable income, okay? Let's talk about disposable income. All right, let me erase this. If you think about disposable income, okay, when you work for a job, right, you're taxed, okay? And I would like to say that I would get that money, but I don't, right? So it goes to the society, right? Because society needs to offer you some services like police services and school services, right? Obviously that takes money and the money comes from you, right? Because you're benefiting or your kids are benefiting off that and we need to pay for that. So obviously we need to fund that and we fund that using taxes, all right? That's fine, but immediately you don't get that money, right? Because the government takes that money away. So what happens is you have a thing called disposable income. So disposable income, or DI, right? Disposable income. Okay, I'll write it down right now. Disposable income. Okay, disposable income. Let me turn around this way so you can see the board. Disposable income is basically what is left after taxes. So you take your gross income, right? Gross income, and you subtract the taxes and you get your DI, okay? You get your disposable income. So disposable income is your gross income minus your taxes. Hopefully pretty straightforward. All right, so this disposable income, what do you do with it? So you take home money, so you work for a job, awesome, and you get some money, awesome, and the government is taken away, so you get the rest of it. So what do you do with this money? Well, you do two things, okay? With this disposable income that you get, okay, you either consume the money, you buy yourself food, clothes, pay for school, whatever it is, right? Goods and services. And then whatever is left of it, you save, okay? So your disposable income is equal to your consumption, okay? C as in consumption, plus your saving, all right? So two components of disposable income are consumption and saving, okay? Pretty important, understand that equation, all right? So let's go ahead and try to graph this consumption equation, okay, that we have. It's known as a consumption function, right? And we can erase this part on the side, and we'll draw the consumption function, okay? People necessarily don't have to save anything. In that case, we call a dissaving. I'll explain that a little later. But basically, when you graph a consumption function, you should think about, as usual, you have two axes, right? X-axis and Y-axis. Your X-axis has disposable income. Yay, awesome. And then you have consumption, okay? All right, you have consumption. So you have this consumption function, all right? And it starts off from a point. Let's call it 10 for our example. I just made that up, all right? And at this point, what happens is that when you see this graph, right? Let's take this point, for example, and let's say this point is at 200, right? You come down here, and let's say that this is 300, right? Let's say it's 300. You take your disposable income, right? What's on your x-axis? Okay, so take your DI minus your consumption, right? Which is 200, and you get your savings, okay? And that's 100 in this case. All right, so a consumption function is basically graphed using a couple of data points. We can go over a table in the next lesson, and we'll try to show you guys how we come up with a function based on that table. But for now, I want to just review the concepts real quick so that we all understand what we just reviewed and what we just went over. One of the first things we talked about in class was the fact that consumer price index is an extremely important indicator, right? What is a consumer price index? It says what's the average level of prices that the consumers are buying, okay? What are the consumers buying at? What are they buying? What kind of goods are they buying? Well, they take those 400 goods, whatever, most of the goods that they take, and they create an average price level, okay? And the difference in that average price level, okay, the difference in the CPI is what creates your inflation, okay? So inflation is defined as a change in the CPI each year. All right, moving on, we talked about nominal interest rate, the fact that it accounts for expected inflation and real interest rate. We talked about unexpected inflation, okay? Then we went on, talked about unemployment, okay? We talked about how we calculate unemployment, okay? Remember, it's unemployed over total labor force, and that's 16 and above, and we don't account for discouraged workers. Next is types of unemployment, okay? We talked about 4 types of unemployment. We talked about, let's start off with frictional. We said that frictional unemployment basically occurs because someone is in transition between jobs. Either they got fired or they quit because they want a better job, or they're basically new in the labor force. They're a college student. Second is that there's a seasonal unemployment, okay? Basically what happens is that there are people attached to the season and the time period, and some economies create jobs within that time period and they eliminate those jobs a little later. Okay, so that's seasonal unemployment, pretty straightforward. Third was structural, and structural we said that was basically a side result, or a result of the fact that there's a fundamental shift in the economy, and a certain event causes that particular industry to eliminate jobs because that skill set is not required. An example is sort of if there's a machine invented to replace a particular person's skill set, what happens is that that person's job goes away normally, right? And the way we counteract that is governments create training programs and they create universities, so we have job skills and skill set that's actually required by the society in that time. Okay, lastly is cyclical unemployment, and cyclical unemployment is basically a result of the business cycle, right? During the recession, we have more unemployed people. During a boom, we have less unemployed people. So cyclical unemployment doesn't have to exist all the time, but frictional and structural does. And because of that reason, unemployment rate cannot be zero. I repeat, unemployment rate cannot be zero. So we have something called as a natural rate of unemployment, which operates at full employment, okay? And it's debated, it's between 4 and 6%, depends on who you talk to. But the natural rate of unemployment is basically the rate of employment when the economy is doing its best, okay? So that being said, we went on to a concept called disposable income, what is left after taxes. We talked about the fact that it breaks down to consumption and savings, okay? Consumption and savings are really important because you get to break down your disposable income and understand how you as a consumer consume and save, okay? And then we try to create functions, okay? And consumption function on the graph to my right. And basically what we're trying to do in the next class is we'll try to go over how we can come with a consumption function if you're given a chart of numbers. So we'll try to derive that in the next class, but for now, I will assign you a homework question. And here is the question. define me the 4 types of unemployment. I think it's really important that you understand the 4 types of unemployment. So let me know what they are, and I'll see you in the next class. Thank you so much.